umva mvuge mvuvumange mvuge icyaza mariya bashumba umva zigira amabara atunga abashumba mu ishyamba abagore n'abana bahasiganiye kugemu kuya rudasumbwa n'ikibumbiro ikibunda cyaramutse yitwaje impirimba mugabo.
These are familiar cultural voices in Rwanda, the little land without borders, the Singapore of Africa. These are voices that I would like to talk more about later in this video. Muraho, amakuru, umuze gute Banyarwanda. My name is Kakot Peter and I would like to show you Rwanda through my eyes. Rwanda is such a street country and I would like to first take you through the do's and don'ts. Here is a list of things that you should not do while in Rwanda. Number 1, do not litter. The first thing you notice immediately you get out of the Kigali International Airport is how clean the roads in Kigali are. If you drive through the city, you will appreciate how clean Kigali is compared to the countries in this region. I'm not trying to belittle other countries in this region. I'm Kenyan, which is a country in this region, but I'm just trying to appreciate that Kigali is exceptionally clean. As such, do not litter. Number 2, do not try to talk about tribes. The worst nightmare in the history of Rwanda is the 1994 genocide. The killings were based on tribes, and for that reason, Rwandans took an oath, never again. Never again shall they be divided along the tribal lines. Talks about tribes are not tolerated and can land you in jail. Number 3, do not talk about the government. Well, in this case you can, but do not try to talk negatively about the government. And again, as a general rule, it is advised that as a tourist, try to keep off local governance and politics. Number 5, do not bribe. This sounds like it should be common sense, but obviously common sense isn't common, at least not in other countries in this region. If you get yourself in problems, do not try to bribe your way out. Do not try to bribe the police, because bribery and by extension corruption is not tolerated in Rwanda. I obviously liked several things in Rwanda, and here's a list of the things that I liked. Number 1, cleanliness. Rwanda is such a clean country, and Kigali, to be very specific, is quite clean. The cleanliness of Kigali is based on a program called Umunsi w'Umuganda, or community contribution in English. Every last Saturday of the month, the traffic is stopped for around 3 hours, and every able-bodied Rwandan is expected by law to come out and do the cleanup. The second thing that I liked about Rwanda is the landscape. Kigali is indeed a city of 1,000 hills. And if you drive through, you'll find out that Kigali, and by extension the whole country, is a composition of hills and valleys. And if you move around, they form such a good scenery. The third thing that I liked about Rwanda is law and order. When you arrive in Rwanda, you will feel it, you will experience it, you will see that everything is going on within the right laws and order, and everyone tries to undertake the responsibilities as expected. But what caught my attention the most is the transport industry, how the buses operate. When you go to the bus station in Rwanda, you will realize that it's quite different from the other countries around this region. Number 1, we have this, it's generally known as a tap and go card. This is a bus card. You are expected to load it with some money, and you can tap it on machine at the bus station to check the balance. But the reason why it's called tap and go is because when you want to take a bus, you want to need to tap this card on a machine on the bus. The transaction is then undertaken automatically, and you'll be able to use the bus. As such, the bus operators can't hike the fare, they can't lower it, the fare is standard, and everything is automated. I like this. It's the first time that I see this kind of arrangement in Africa. And at the bus station, there are the volunteers who are free and willing to help you when in doubt. They will direct you on where to get the bus to whatever direction. They'll direct you to where you're supposed to clean your hands, and of course they will direct the new travelers on where to get this tap and go card. The fourth thing is road safety. The most common way of moving around in the East African region is the boda or the use of motorbikes as a public transport. And in Rwanda, I was much impressed by how the borders operated. And while in Rwanda, you cannot use the border without a helmet. Both the rider and the passenger are expected to have a helmet. And the next thing that impressed me was when we have the passenger helmet, obviously there'll be multiple passengers using the same border in one day. And to avoid spread of skin diseases or so, every passenger is expected to have a piece of clothing, commonly known as bandana in Kenya. And this piece of clothing you're supposed to put on your head, and then you wear the helmet so that there is no direct contact between your skin and the helmet. That way, the spread of skin diseases are prevented. And of course, there are some things that I didn't like. This is not to say that Rwanda is a bad place, but in every place there are things you will like and things that you will not like. The first thing that I didn't like about Rwanda is the absence of street food. I like street food, and in every country I go to, I try to get the street food. But in Kigali, I was so disappointed because there are no street food. So if you are a street food lover, you might be a little disappointed in Kigali. However, I cracked something with the help of the locals, of course. If you like the street food and you are in Kigali, you might want to go to Nyamirambo. This is the only place in Kigali where the street foods are. The second thing that I didn't like about Rwanda is the language. Most Rwandans do not speak English, and they also do not speak Swahili. So obviously there was a language barrier. In the bigger hotels, they will tell you that the locals speak English and Swahili, but this is far from the truth. My interaction with the locals was quite hectic. So if you plan to go to Rwanda, try to learn some key phrases that you're likely to use in an everyday interaction. But better still, in my case, I chose to download an application, Kenya-Rwanda English Translation app, which was quite helpful because this problem gets worse when you get out of Kigali. Apart from the social and the political aspect, Rwanda also has a very interesting cultural aspect. And to understand the culture of Rwanda, I traveled off Kigali 2 hours southwards to Nyanza. This is where the king lived before the colonial times, and for that reason, it is considered as the center of the Rwandan culture. While in Nyanza, I visited the King's Palace Museum, and I learned some important facts. Number one, the Hutus and the Tutsis are not tribes. These were social classes, and the social classes were based on wealth. In the Rwandan culture, cattle were so important, and to a greater extent, I think they still are right now. And those who had cattle were considered rich, while those who did not, or those who had less or few, were considered poor. The Hutus were crop farmers, while the Tutsis were livestock rearers. And for that reason, the Tutsis were considered rich because they had the cattle, while the Hutus were considered poor because they were crop farmers or they had fewer cattle. For that reason, it was possible that a single individual could switch from being a Tutsi to being a Hutu. If you had livestock and a calamity happens, they die or something, it was possible to switch status. However, the colonialists viewed these two categories as tribes. They did this to have a divide and rule as a political strategy, or maybe they were just purely ignorant about the fact. It was interesting to learn that the Hutus and the Tutsi are not real tribes, but rather social classes. I have some evidence to this. Even though Rwanda has the Tutsis and the Hutus, you realize that they have a single language. There is no Tutsi as a language and Hutu as a language. They all speak Kenya-Rwanda. One surprising information that I got from the King's Palace Museum is that all women belong to the king. Back then in the days, if the king loved your wife, all he needed to do was to come, get your wife, and in exchange give you the cows. These were special cows called the Inyambu Cows, with the long horns. They were pretty creatures. But still surprising to me that a single man would own every woman. But you see, cultures, when you live in them, when you identify with them, they obviously do not sound as scary as we look at it now. In the King's Palace Museum, there are 3 key huts. The first hut is obviously the king's house, where the king lived or lives with the wife. The second hut is the beer taster's hut. The responsibility of the beer tester was to ensure that the beer is okay for the king's consumption. The third hut was the milkmaid's hut. The milkmaid had a responsibility of taking care of the milk, and because milk is pure, the milkmaid had to be pure too, quote unquote, sexually untouched. The other places that I visited in Rwanda included Muhanga, Rusumo. This is a city next to the Tanzanian border, and this is Rusumo River. This river also holds an important part of history, because during the 1994 genocide, several people died in this river while trying to cross over to Tanzania. The third place was the Kanyaru border, which is the border between Rwanda and Burundi. When I visited, it was quite dull. The other place I visited was Rusizi. Rusizi is next to the DRC border. I also wanted to visit Gisenyi. However, while on that plan, the government of Rwanda announced stricter measures due to COVID-19, and this meant that the movement would be restricted thereafter, so I chose to run towards the border. But next time when I go back to Rwanda, I think it will be a good idea to visit Gisenyi. But I also liked Rusizi, because Rusizi offers almost the same thing that Gisenyi offers. And if you decide to go to Rusizi, please consider booking yourself in Peace Guest Hotel, because it's cheap. The internet is superb if you're an internet addict like I am, and it gives a perfect view of Lake Kivu, which is quite exceptional. It's a beautiful scenery. So that was Rwanda through my eyes. Murakoze Banyarwanda, and see you in DRC. Bye-bye.